This is a bonus edition of Space Minds by SpaceNews. This week, we're at the U.S. Geospatial Intelligence Foundation GEOINT Symposium in St. Louis, where we'll post episodes Monday through Wednesday. Our guest today is Robert Cardillo, president of the Cardillo Group. He sits down with Chief Content and Strategy Officer Mike Gruss to break down the latest news and insights from the event. But first, a word from our sponsor, Kepler Communications.
Kepler is delivering data at light speed with an SDA-compatible optical data relay network connecting space and Earth communications with low latency, high throughput, and enhanced security.
Hi, I'm Mike Gruss with SpaceNews, and this is a special edition of our Space Minds podcast at GEOINT. I'm here with Robert Cardillo, who's the chairman of the U.S. GIF board and also a former director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. This is obviously a very busy week for the space and intelligence communities.
Good busy.
Yeah, good busy.
Right.
There's a lot going on. We're curious about some of the budget uncertainty that we're hearing about for the intelligence agencies, this new focus on commercial from the Trump administration, and obviously AI. We just wrapped up the D&I speaking.
Indeed.
And so what were some of your takeaways from her speech, and what have you kind of been listening for so far?
Well, one, I'll be fully transparent. I was very pleasantly surprised when she agreed to come keynote. I mean, Obviously we send out a lot of invitations. We always include the Director of National Intelligence. But I just didn't know, given where she was in her tenure and if she was ready to do something.
She hasn't spoken a lot.
That's right. So anyway, I very much appreciate the fact that she did it. I was able to thank her personally before she went on stage, because not only did she do that, she showed up an hour and a half early, and she spent an hour and 20 minutes on the floor meeting with, both established and startup and academic institutions on the floor. So very grateful. As the chair of USGIF, I'm very grateful for her presence. Right. You asked, though, what did I hear from her? I heard some traditional things, and I'll talk about those, and I heard some, non-traditional approaches. She's got a military background. She served for 22 years. She's enlisted after 9/11, so she's clearly dedicated to that. And she expressed her frustration with life in uniform and forward deployed, and why did this intelligence community take so long or make it so hard? Or,
I think the phrase she used was archaic procurement laws.
Well, I'm not even there yet. I'm just talking about, look, I'm on the front line. I need information. You don't get it to me on my iPad in time, or you overclassify it and it's hard for me to use. So that's the frustration I'm at. We'll get to contracting in a second. And so I think for a D&I, that's a good experience to have. And I'll tie it to an answer she gave later in her responses. She talked about kind of her management rhythm at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And she talked about, getting briefed on programs that might be 10 or 20 years old, and why do we do it this way? Why do we do it that way? And her response was, oftentimes she would get, ma'am, because we've always done it that way. And obviously her being not just new, but new to intelligence, never having served inside, which some people argued was somehow an inhibitor to hers. This is a long way to say, I think she's taking the advantage that she has of not coming from the community, having been an end user, and then asking questions that perhaps hadn't been asked before. So I think that's all to the good. She mentioned a number of times, and this will touch both on the archaic, budgeting process, contracting process, but also your comment early on about budgetary pressures. And maybe just to reduce the expectation of the audience, I'm not going to completely be able to square this circle, but I'll try, okay? Because it isn't completely clear to me how it all comes together, but I'm happy to share where my head's at as I experience the current reality. So we had an election in November, right? We had an inauguration in January. I don't need to tell your audience that created quite a disruptive environment. Yeah. And you can categorize for yourself what you thought was positive disruption and what you thought was negative, but I don't think anybody can argue. Actually, the word I've heard is that, again, say what you will about the value of the first 100 days. It's not too hard to say the most consequential first 100 days. You stack that up against FDR, right, in 32, and that's saying a lot, or 33.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, right. So, in that disruption, the president in his administration, obviously with D&I Gabbard being part of it, is challenging some what they thought were unhealthy norms. You know, the way to get good value from the commercial sector is to set up a long-term, contract that is competed on the front end, and healthy competition, but that once awarded, these are called cost-plus contracts,
right,
which is, a model in which you get a base, and you can request increases depending on performance or lack thereof. And this administration seems to feel like that's not the best use of taxpayer dollars. So you've got that pressure, which I think I broadly agree with. I mean, I hate to blanket all cost plus contracts as bad, and all fixed price contracts is good. I don't think life.
But there's been a move for that for
Sure.
10 years or more.
Sure. And look, I used to say in government too that I think Secretary McNamara should get great credit for creating this planning and programming budgeting cycle that we needed in order to defeat the Soviet machine, because we were competing against a machine. It was a big communist machine. And Secretary McNamara and his team came up with an American machine, and arguably over the next 20 years, we won, right? Our machine beat their machine. And then I like to say, but unfortunately, we've kept the machine that we built to compete with the Soviets in the 60s and 70s. And now we're competing with the Chinese in the 20s and teens and 20s. And again, I think going back to this administration, I think they're saying the same thing. That model needs to be disrupted. So very complimentary of that. I think the other thing that stood out for me is that she adamantly said, you can go find the quote, but it was along the lines of, why is the government building when a commercial company has a solution, and I think she said 10 times cheaper? Now, the answer to that question is the government shouldn't do that, right? The government should avail itself of the commercial. So if that means commercial first, and the bumper sticker, buy what you can, build what you must. We love the bumper sticker, certainly in industry. We don't always see it in action. And so I think that's all positive demand, and I think that's all positive change. What has been challenging, you mentioned the budgetary pressures, is that we're hearing and seeing and feeling meaningful cuts to the very same budgets that I heard the D&I supporting.
Yep. And this came up in Congress last week.
Of course it did, right, and in front of the HASC, right? And look, former Congresswoman Gabbard said, hey, this is a messy process, and oh, by the way, it doesn't always make sense, right? So she's well aware of how complicated this is. So I'm not pointing fingers at her or OMB or the administration. I realize how messy it is to close a budget or try to close a budget and deliver it to the Hill. But now, as with my industry hat on, it does feel disconnected to hear that admonition and direction for commercial first, and well, why did you just take away the budget that would have done that?
Yeah, I think what we've seen the last couple weeks or months, and not just in GEOINT, I think maybe space at large, is there's this duality, right? Like there's this optimism that there's going to be new opportunities for commercial companies, but then you look at what's happening with budgets or what you can see from budgets, and it doesn't square.
That's right.
And maybe the contracts aren't the same size as they were in the past, or maybe the primes aren't going to be in the same spot to compete that they were years ago.
Maybe all those things. Yeah, right. And so, like in any business, every time you put a maybe in, right, you get a little less certain. Your investors get a little less sure, right? Or if you're a publicly traded company, the market will go,
right,
that revenue looks softer than it did last quarter. I now value company ABC, in a different way. But I guess I'm going to give another positive here as we try to round this out. The D&I was asked about Golden Dome and the opportunities they're in, and let's face it, that's an area that there is budget moving towards, right? And
tremendous budget.
And and it's arguably new budget. Now, we've always had a missile defense budget, right? We've always had missile defense capabilities, but Golden Dome takes it to a completely different level. So your viewers are probably aware that Huntsville is getting more and more, travelers down there as we begin to have discussions about what is Golden Dome and how will it be competed and where are the opportunities. So I would call that out as a bright, shining opportunity for everybody in that room. And obviously this is a GEOINT meeting, but that's not alone. I mean, there's obviously many partners that are required. But it does seem, again, that outside of that specific example, everything else just feels a little tighter. And I think the National Intelligence Program is released the year after it's spent. That's the new law, and so it's publicly known in the rearview mirror. But it's $70–80 billion, and I served, obviously, to include at ODNI, and used to remind myself and ourselves, we have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, I'm also aware that there are global challenges that you can't solve all with money. So I've always been a big fan of increased efficiencies, and can we do better by the taxpayer through a more efficient approach? And again, I'm going to come around to compliment. That's what I'm hearing from the president. That's what I'm seeing in his EOs, his executive orders along these lines. I still want to say, though, I feel a disconnect between the orders and the budget lines.
Do you feel like you have a better sense of how the Trump administration may use space or intelligence or GEOINT to work within the priorities it's set? Because it feels maybe it could be a little different from how the Biden administration thought of it.
Yeah, look, I'm generally bullish here. We've seen recent indication that they are going to restart the Space Council. And frankly, even though the Space Council has existed, and I don't know the original date for many administrations, President Trump's first administration, under Vice President Pence's chair of that committee, truly changed the landscape. I mean, it was a priority for Vice President Pence, and I get it. The Vice President isn't the president, but it still matters. And the fact that he spent time on that made a difference.
A lot of policy directives that came out of it.
And I think the Department of Commerce and the NOAA regulations and the licensing, we made good progress. And so I credit the Space Council and, in that case, Vice President Pence's interest. And again, this is not a criticism, but it didn't have the same priority for Vice President Harris.
Right.
I mean, I think the administration was broadly supportive, but it just wasn't something that she spent a lot of time on. And so that, I don't know that we suffered, but I don't know that we made as much progress as we could have. So now President Trump comes back, different vice president this time. We've heard that the council is going to be relaunched and they're going to review membership. And I think there's a user group that has been on that, so industry's interested in contributing. So I think that's to the positive. Now we'll see. I have not spoken to the vice president about this. I was in Munich at the same time, and I heard reflections that in his conversations that it is a priority for him. So at this point, yeah, we'll see. I guess the other thing though is you can't ignore the reality that President Trump launched the Space Force. 2019. And look, I was not centered to the debate, but around the debate for about 10 years about, it really wasn't if we need a Space Force, but when.
Yeah.
And, you might say this is the usual government answer to that is, not today, Mr. President. We need a little bit more time and we need a little bit more prep because these things are difficult. Well, again, consequential President Trump just said, nope, do it now.
And General Saltzman will be here this week.
Indeed.
Speaking, what do you expect to hear from him?
I think he will say that that was the right decision at that time,
Right.
And I think he will say that the Space Force has made great progress in 5 into its 6th year here. And then I think he'll say, but if we don't get the budget help,
Yeah, because he's had relatively flat budgets the last couple of years.
Yeah, and again, every service has its own challenges.
Yes.
But and obviously I have a lot of space background, so I'm very sympathetic to the general's issues. But especially when if you consider that he's a startup service. I mean, even quote simple things as personnel. I mean, I'm familiar enough, with his team in the Pentagon, and I know they have difficulty just covering meetings.
Yeah.
It's the Pentagon, right? And trust me, if you don't show up to the meeting, you don't tend to get any benefit from their end. So,
right.
And it sounds like, well, it's an easy move. You shift billets or personnel, and it just isn't that easy. So I think General Saltzman is going to be optimistic. By the way, I believe General Saltzman and Admiral Whitworth are closer to the agreement that they've been talking about, and I certainly don't know that it will be done, but I expect some positive news there on Wednesday from the both of them.
Okay.
And I think your audience might be aware that general debate has been lanes in the road. Right?
Yes.
Right. What's the Space Force do? What does NGA do?
And those lanes just might be more clearly defined.
I think so.
Moving forward.
Yeah, I think we're making progress there, and so I expect to hear that on Wednesday.
Good. You brought up Admiral. What else do you expect to hear from him this week, or what will you be listening for to signal? Hey, because I always think of the speech as a way to kind of set priorities for the next 12 months.
Indeed. Okay.
And so what will you be listening for there?
Yeah. I mean, I gave 5 of them.
Yeah.
Because I served for 5 GEOINTs, and they're huge deals.
Right.
I mean, you spend a good part of your year going, okay, what are we going to time for GEOINT? What are we going to roll out? Because it's a bit like it's some marketing obviously, but it's also messaging to industry about your priorities. Well, I don't know that I'm going to tell you anything you haven't heard before, because the Admiral's been pretty vocal lately, and obviously he was testifying last week. And, I saw him speak at Space Symposium 6 weeks or so ago. And 2025 is the year of NGAI, right? Which is obviously
that was what I was going to bring up next.
Yep. Yeah. And look, I am still close to the agency, both as a former director, but obviously now as a nonprofit relationship, but also for-profit.
Yep.
I work for companies that partner with NGA, and so I'm very appreciative of how much effort is going into that bumper sticker or statement. I think the Admiral is making real investments in doing tangible test evaluation pilots, with the large language models, with the advanced computer vision tools. I'm sure he will talk about NGA Maven, right? Yeah. And I think he should. I think it's been broadly successful. Yes.
Can you help put? Because you talked about AI during some of your
I did.
speeches. So, what's the difference now, or how do you feel that this isn't just the same debate? That it's progressing, it's more nuanced, it's ratcheted up.
It's a great question. My bumper sticker, I had a number of them, but one of them was AAA, right? And so it was augmentation, automation, artificial intelligence. We had a AAA program, but the words were put in that order for a reason. Because I really thought in 2014, 2015, what I could reasonably expect is to augment the soft copy processes, and maybe I can speed up how long it takes to get an image onto a desktop or to send a report out. Automation was, computer vision was coming to the table, but I don't know if you're familiar with the ImageNet program, in which Silicon Valley was trying to see if a computer could approach human capabilities in identifying, in those days, dogs and cats and videos. And it was pretty early days. And so really, I think AI was very much a stretch goal for me. One, because let's face it, NVIDIA wasn't where it is now. I mean, it was a gaming engine, which, by the way, did lead to the kind of technology. So I'm not criticizing that approach. But I suppose DeepMind was around, right? Because they were doing the AlphaGo competitions, and IBM remember Big Blue was defeating Kasparov and whatnot, and we were going, oh my God, it can play chess better than a human, and so but it really wasn't tangibly available. So I do think 2015, 2025 has obviously been a complete sea change, and I guess, now I'll put my industry hat on. What really excites me, I spent some time at Planet Labs, long history in Earth observation, deep stacks of data that frankly probably shouldn't be put in front of a human. Now I'm going to have to caveat with my friends at Planet later, and they're going, "What do you mean, Robert, you shouldn't say we shouldn't be."
Right.
But what I mean is it really should go to a machine first. You know, you can always save it for human expertise and analytics later, but boy, those pixels really are so well structured for this revolution. And I'm the wrong guy to talk about how AI works. I don't know who is the right person because it's all a little bit mysterious to us. But I have seen some amazing, relatively quick developments when you just, I'll say, take a Claude or a Llama or a Gemini off the shelf. You haven't even finely tuned it, and begin to have it interact with these pixel data sets.
Yeah.
Nowhere near perfect, makes tons of errors and right now. But I guess, and this is something I wish I had thought about in 2015, because part of my challenge in 2015 when I was doing this AAA thing, some of my imagery analysts were folding their arms and going, "Oh, I know what you're really up to.
Trying to replace me.
You're coming for my job."
Yeah.
And as much as I said it's not about elimination, it's about elevation, meaning I just want the computer to answer 3 questions it's really good at: what, where, and when.
Yeah.
You, my friend, my expert, I need to save you for 2 really difficult questions, much more difficult: why and what's next. But I will tell you, I was not successful in that. Some arms never came unfolded, right? I'm not going to use this. So what I love about what's happening now, and I see the analysts interacting with these tools, they're like super interns, and they understand interns and apprentices.
Yep.
But these interns and apprentices don't go to sleep. They don't take lunch breaks, right?
Right.
They're, you know, and they're persistent. And so, and by the way, they only get as smart as you train them. So it's not a tool coming at you, right? It's a service coming for you. And again, some of this is, boy, I wish I had known that then. But life is a movement in one direction. So
Great.
I'll be comfortable there.
Well, Robert, thanks so much for joining us. And for our viewers, all of our coverage is from GEOINT is available on SpaceNews.com. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Kepler Communications. Our main issue is also on the newsstand. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you later this week.